back to this, and again, a couple times I'm going to stop and say any illustrations of this, but I want to get through these 5 steps in a couple minutes, a few minutes, more than a couple. But okay, about the established church, 4, I said. 5, just because it has been done or exists as an attitude does not mean it was or is good in God's opinion. Every church thinks it's doing what it should for that generation, but sometimes don't make the turn. People get proud of what they've done in the past and don't know that, everybody knows that people in their 20s are a whole different breed today, and 30s also, and certainly the kids. So we got to make changes. Let's talk about some of the ways we do that. The pastor's role in deliberate strategy. I'm going to say that of all the changes that we make in a church, you have to lead most of them. You don't have to take credit for any of them. I think on the brochure that we had for this, I was asked to list changes, and I think the 2 hardest were 2 total constitutional changes, to rewrite them. But following these steps, I just want to tell you they work. In one case, we had 2 negative votes, and in the other case, I don't know how many, but less than 20 in a church of way over 1,000 voting and way over that in attendance. And it's because we followed these steps. I use these steps in 7 building programs, 3 in Ashland, 4 in Ashland, and 3 in Akron, and actually followed these steps. So I really want to say they work, and it involves relationships and hard work. And a lot of 3 great C's: communication, and more of it. So I want to go down and try to explain these. Number 1, the shepherd is to love and lead. It's your role. And you may have a staff, but if you're the senior pastor or the lead pastor, lead, rule, shepherd, teach, equip, and be an example. By the way, on our staff at Akron and for licensure, we did it ourselves with 4 or 5 churches that were also chapel churches that we had started. Everybody had to memorize LRSTI, the LRSTI method of pastoring. Lead, rule, shepherd, teach, equip, and be an example. Rule is manage, but it's harder to say LMSTI, so LRSTI. To lead, verse 2, is partly to plan the future, what we are becoming, and every church has a future and has plans to become something. Some of the plans are to stay the same, but that's what we're going to talk about.
Can you say that again? What's to lead is?
Say it again.
What is that?
To lead is to plan the future. Number 2? Thanks. Now argue with me on number 3. No one else will eat and sleep the church. Do you all agree with that? Or Lance, you do? What do you mean? What do you mean when you say that or when you read that?
I think it goes back to your comments that you were making about lay leaders. 50-hour job, he devotes a little bit of time each week, where as a vocational pastor, that's my entire week.
Yeah. And our wives sometimes get tired of it that we talk. I know I said this here before, but you don't all come. But 2 times we're driving along. This is driving. This is a car. My wife's here. And 2 times in our lives that I remember, she said something, and then she said to me, "What did I just say?" And she knew I was worrying about something at church and concentrating on that. And both times I answered her when she said, "What did I just say?" Write this down, Matthew. I said, "You know." And both times she did not accept that as a good answer. So I've been there, you've been there. But am I on television? I just want to speak here to all my friends out there in television land, around the world. Send your money in now. Just write to me, Knute Larson, Sawyer, Michigan. That's all the address you need. Okay. No one else will eat and sleep the church. They'll act like they do. They will... They'll pretend that they've really thought about this. Some of them have prayed about it. But you have change agent, and you have people who love you and will do it because you want to. You have people that own the vision. That's where we're trying to get them to do, own it with these 5 steps. But you also have people that won't change anything, and somehow you have to work around them. If you're near Chicago, you can put out a contract on them. If you're not near Chicago, Fort Wayne does a little bit of that. Number 4, a good goal and vision can be shared with and embraced by other leaders. If you can't convince your wife or you can't convince your main leaders or staff, don't do it. If you can't convince the council that works around you, the board, don't do it. So that's part of the deal. How do you sell this? And I'm going to use some words that aren't very biblical, but how do you help them own it? And a lot of that is time and communication, and for a serious Christian, mission. Base this. If people are sincere about their following Christ, Ed always uses the term on mission. They understand you got to do things at church. There are other people that are just roadblocks. I bet they're that way in their marriage or in their work. I really do. But we got to live with it at church. Number 5, vision and plans always include actions to be done right now. Now, this is the simplest thing I can say about vision, but I have spoken about this with many pastors, and I've read many books. I read Audrey Malfer's and his books on vision and mission statement. And they make it very complicated sometimes. But in essence, vision is point A. That's where we are now. Just that simple. And where we want to be is down the road. And that's point B. How do you get there? And I'm going to just say, when we do this, on almost every one of these, you need this. Anywhere from, I skipped 4 because step 4 never worked for me. On every one of these, you need steps, how we're going to get there. Now, this sounds corny, and you're welcome to smile. At the chapel when I went, we were an auditorium church. Ron Huff, you don't know that name. Does anybody even know that name? I thought you were putting up your hand. You're way too young. Do you? Ron Huff died recently of Parkinson's. But he was the first of the big choir and orchestra and music arranger. Went to Nashville for his last 30 years. He was at our church. So I went to a church where there was a fabulous preacher, Dave Burnham, and a terrific auditorium that seated about 1,800, and a choir that was out of sight, and an orchestra, and spectators. The first Christmas concert I was there were probably 15 numbers, and at the end of every Christmas concert, the pastor's job was to pick the best number, and that was the encore. So I went there in September, and at the concert they said, and you pick the encore. There's probably 5 soloists and the choir numbers. I'm not doing that. But that was their tradition. I'm saying we are a spectator church. and we want to be a worshiping church involved. Those 10 steps were very difficult because the first one was a new worship leader. And there we're talking staff. Well, my point is, part of the strategy we're going to see, even a building program or a change of constitution, is not we have a terrible constitution, that's A, and B is we want a good constitution. I have 5 samples, by the way, of pretty good ones. But the part many times people skip is all these steps in between. And it's amazing how little you can do in a year and how much you can do in 5 years. I would add it's amazing how you can get from point A to B with the proper steps. And every one of those steps needs an approximate date. That's not so important. But a person who's in charge of that step or helps lead the way. Often it's going to be you, but not always. Questions on that so far? I mean, I'm going to try to flesh this out, but a lot of what I say is this simple and this hard. And we don't have all of our authority, we can say it's biblical, but most of it is earned by love. So love your people, that part we get there first. And here we go. Number 5, vision plans always include actions to be done right now. For instance, we want to be known as a church of grace and love, so we start now with some of those things. Action steps always need a person. Some of that is a person who's really good with details. Some of it is a person who's really good with vision. Some of it is just saying, well, that's me again. I don't think you ever tell a church, we're a grouchy church. That's where we are now. We're going to become a happy church. That'll go over big. I wouldn't even do that in your marriage. Matthew, you're going to get married, I think, in about, I'm telling you when. Don't 18 months. And it's going to go really well. Are you excited?
That's soon.
That's,
Yes.
okay, 20 months. Okay. I just feel it. Okay, I don't know who it is. I'm not sure it's the girl you're dating right now.
Wow.
No, oh, you want it to be her. Okay, it's 19 months. I think you're making it shorter. Okay, but if you said in a marriage, we don't have a happy marriage, let's have a happy marriage. So it's a sad marriage, you're just perfunctory. You have dates because your master schedule says you have to. It's not exciting. And get there, I can give you 10 steps. But you can't just say, honey, we're going to be a happy couple from now on. You ready to start? Amen. And read Ephesians 5, and you got it. No, it's hard work. It's hard work to change the Constitution. It's hard work to help a church reach 20 and 30-year-olds. And even if they know they're dying, they won't admit it. Okay. 6, action steps always need a person responsible. Accomplishments call for celebrations along the way. We usually get what we pray for and embrace. But by embrace, I mean take these steps. Okay, we're coming to the 5 steps. Most common mistakes while leading established churches. I could give you stories. Making changes too quickly or too fast, which is pretty much the same as too quickly. Why I said that, I don't know. But in the Greek, it says there's the word quickly and the word fast. So it's, number 2, hurting the people already there while you try to connect with people who are not there. We've all done that. The worst thing in the world, not the worst, but tied with some of the bad things, would be for me to stand here and say, why don't we have 50 people here? I mean, why can't we be a bigger workshop? In your head, you're thinking, what's wrong with us? Right? You're here, Lee. What does it matter? And I think that's what people do about church growth. We got to get to be a bigger church. It's like, well, what's wrong with us? Please, all these take time and love. And I don't know that you ever announce we want to be a bigger church. Anything that blatant. You want evangelism and you want to grow, but some of that insults the people that are sitting there. Like, what's wrong with us? Don't you like that we are here? They'll take it the worst way. Murphy's Law says they'll take it bad every time. So anyway, most common mistakes: hurting the people already there while you try to connect with the people not yet there. And many pastors have done this. We got to reach the young adults. I don't think they'll agree with that, but then when they find out it means you change a few things, or music, or even how you dress. We used to, when I went to the chapel, this is just fun, I think, the pastors who were on the platform that day, let's say there's 5 of them, and it was a large staff, they'd pray together. They told me this the first week. I didn't know this. They'd pray together over in a room, and they'd walk out in single file in blue suits in the winter and come over to the bullpen where they sat in 6 chairs. It worked. It was fine for its day. So I had a blue suit, and then in the summer you wore either a tan suit or a white suit. And I pictured this. It was funny that you walked out, and I remember saying to one of the guys, "Do you have to walk in step?" You know. Well, that was a change I made immediately. No, I said, let's all be out in the halls greeting people, whatever you wear. I'll wear a blue suit. I wasn't going to change that immediately. Just a month ago, I started wearing a sport coat. No, but I didn't change that immediately, but I said, no, we're not going to meet. We're going to pray on Friday, and we're going to all be in the halls to meet. Well, some of them didn't like that idea at all. Well, we always meet in there to pray, you know. And these were staff. Anyway, so we changed that. That's the kind of thing you can change immediately. But then, how do you change? Let's talk about those as we go. Switching sermon or worship style rather abruptly. It was a while back now, but I had a guy call me and he said, "I need your help." Okay, this was Saturday. He said, "Tomorrow I'm announcing a congregational meeting on Wednesday to vote on changing worship styles." People are still changing worship styles, but he was going to have a congregational vote. He said, "What should I do? I'm afraid there's going to be opposition." I said, "I think there will be opposition. I would cancel the meeting." And he thought I was kidding. He said, "Well, no, it's a congregational vote." I said, "I really would cancel it if you can. That's just asking for war." That's like Trump last night having discussion on some of his points. Anyway, I forget what happened. I think he's at a different church. Number 6, not explaining the mission purpose enough, not renewing the vision. My favorite coach, Lyle Schaller, renewed the vision every 6 weeks. That can take 30 seconds or a minute in your pastoral prayer or before you pray. Don't forget, one of the things we want to do as a church is really understand grace and worship and do it at home and at church. Be in a community group, but especially have a sense of love and community and go through those same directions. I just renewed the vision as well as they saw it was familiar. I'm sure I told this to some of you, but one time, one of the best examples of this, I think, was we had our youth pastors had the kids bring an unsaved or an unchurched friend, whatever they called them, to a concert Friday night. We had a second campus outside, and it was a Christian rock group, one of my favorites. I think it was Lenny Zeppelin or Bobby Dylan, I'm not sure. But anyway, it was some name I didn't know, like I don't know those names. Anyway, the police were called. It was too loud. The neighbors called the police. You know how loudspeakers can blare. And so they turned it down and they finished the concert. But Sunday, when I got up at the sermon time, because that's the best time to say something really important, I apologized and I said, the police were called, the music was too loud. Apparently, in the recording of Bev Shea singing, they got it too loud. And I just said that, and I said, we're sorry, we turned it down. But I want to tell you something. I applaud those kids. They were all supposed to bring somebody who doesn't go to church. I mean, that's how this church started in 1934, with a few people down there at that storefront, and everybody was supposed to bring new people to church that don't go anywhere. And I renewed the vision in my apology, and it was received well. And at the end of it, we had a hand. Let's thank the kids for caring about the unbelievers that they go to school with. So in the apology was also applause for the kids, but it was also renewing the vision. Don't forget who we are as a church. We're not going to be Republican or Democrat. We're a church that honors the grace of God, seeks to honor Him with worship and obedience, have community among each other, even though we don't agree on everything. Stay with our mission. We know what it is, and keep talking about it, always with integrity. You just renewed the vision. I think some guys, especially in their 30s and 40s, don't realize how much they are the leader of that church. And I beg you to accept that. You don't feel like it. I don't think I ever looked in the mirror and thought, hot dogs, we've got us a leader. But you have to do it. Okay.
I think we're mostly in our 35s and 40s. It's hard to feel that confident. I'm 35. Feeling like you know what to do, and there's a lot riding on your shoulders, and fear of screwing up, and dishonoring God, making it about yourself, setting arrogance aside. How do you...
So what's your question? How do you get over that?
Yeah, how do you not suck? No. How do you...
Yeah, answer that
When
one.
you were realizing that you were the leader that you needed to be, how did you lead well? How did you arrive at that?
With slow steps, with my wife praying for me, with a few mistakes, and with looking in the mirror. I didn't look in the mirror, but saying, I got to do this. I remember that's a great question. I remember sitting in meetings and thinking, why it's so quiet when I was 35. I'm not sure what age, but 30s. And then realizing they're waiting for me to lead them. I remember that at the chapel with 10 very strong men, trustees, and a small group of confidants. And I remember thinking, and I would have been 43 then, why is it so quiet? And then it struck me, they're waiting for me. And at that point I said, and we had fasted for a year every Wednesday, a lot of us, asking God to help us be guided. I don't think God gives you an answer. I think He helps you make the right decision with wisdom. And I remember saying, let's do it. And they all said, fine. Now, those are men that understood leadership. They were all leaders. But I'm not answering your question. I think you realize it doesn't matter if the deacons are 70 and you're 35. It matters that you're the pastor and you listen to them and do your research and go carefully, but you still say, we need to do this. And you meet one-on-one. I would never argue somebody to change their mind in a group meeting unless he's really being adamant. But I don't think I ever had a board meeting where someone disagreed, where I didn't call them or mostly have coffee soon after that and talk and listen. You know what people need more than anything else is that you heard their opinion. But I'm diverging. Some of it is you got to do it. I was scared to death I still get scared when I play basketball because I know I'm not very good. But I played here at Grace when you didn't have to be so good. Lee's out of the room right now, but he's very good. I was mediocre, but I was on the team when it was small. But how do you do that? You just say, I got to do this. I'm going to love it. I think I can be spiritual and say, I pray, I kneel. I try to kneel 3 times a week to just be a servant, but then I got to go do it. Like you, when I was your age and younger, I looked at older men that were objecting, and I thought, he's wrong. And I just would say, I just think that's wrong, but tell me more what you think. I don't think that'll work. I think you got to have nerve and Jesus and lead. And the more you do it, the more you realize you're the one that's thought this through. Now, if it's a knee-jerk reaction or you're angry, that wouldn't be you. But then you shouldn't say anything. But when you've done all that, we're going to look at these steps, I promise. I keep saying that. I'm going to ask you to marry me in a moment, I kept telling her. But just first, I want to give some preliminaries. Have you read Ephesians 5? No. But some of it is just saying, I accept the position as pastor. And some of it is learning by mistakes. And I think at least 3 times on Sunday morning, maybe I should have done it more, but I can think of 3 big times when I apologized on Sunday and took a few minutes. But other times, when Dave Smith left our church at the chapel to go to Willow Creek, he's an executive pastor for them at Crystal Lake. Wonderful guy. I hope I'm saying this with right motives. I think I am. He sat on a council of 5 of us, sometimes 4, but 5 most years, who made the decisions for staff. They were all pastors, 4 associates, big staff. He used to argue with me in a nice way. He was young. He knew how to say Bob Dylan. He made fun of me when I said Bobby Dylan. It was good-natured. But in that meeting, but our agreement was we walk out of this room, we have one decision. One, mine. No. We argue, we come to something here. I compromise, they compromise. They know I'm the leader, but I trust these guys. But when we walk out there, and Dave was that way, but when he left the church to go to Willow Creek, I was leaving too, and they were saying goodbye to me, and Dave said something that meant nothing or very little to anybody else, but it meant a lot to me. He said, Knute is the master of incremental change. Which means, in Dave's mind, he meant it as a compliment, but he also meant he goes way too slowly. He didn't mean it mean, but that's why he argued there. But I think he had come to the place where he had me up to speak to his staff at Willow Creek, at Crystal Lake, and on incremental change. Because he knows that's the only way you don't alienate so many. I answered several other questions too there, but let's look at these 5 steps. I think it'll raise other questions. Okay, the need we already know is there. Definition and the agents of change. Here we go. You can ask me how these applied to Constitution, changes in music, changes in our 7 building programs. And by the way, they all met their goal on the exact date of 3 years giving. One of them 4-year. Number 1, me. You're at the center if you're the senior pastor. But 2 is important, a co-manager, a tribal chief, a person who's well known in the church, who's good in that area, and who loves Jesus as much as you do. I want somebody else to be the chairman of this program, if it's a program, a constitutional change, a building program. Not if it's the change in music style, it's the worship leader. So I invest in that person, and we work out this together, how we're going to do it. But the third step, which a lot of people skip, is, I called it on there, owners and shapers, which could go up to 10% of the people in a church of 200. In our situation, it included at least 30 or 40 people who helped form this, who argued with us. It might have been we had a strong trustee elder board, but it would include other people. You have the privilege of bringing in anybody who's good in that area. So these people help shape it. They are not only in the know, they help shape it. They're people who help come up with why we need a constitution and what are some of the changes we need to make. I said this to the class. It's kind of funny. My job description when I went to the chapel was, the senior pastor shall serve unhindered and unhampered by any person living or dead. That was it. Article 7, Section 2A. That's the job description of the senior pastor. Amen. Any questions? I always wondered how you could be hampered by a person who's dead. He'll serve unhindered and unhampered by any person living or dead. And anybody... Anyway, I changed it to, shall serve unhindered and unhampered by any person. No, I didn't. I changed it for steps to fire the pastor and what his job description is. But I'm just saying the Constitution needed to be changed. Everything at Ashland went to a congregational vote. In the Constitution, you elected a flower chairman, a hospitality chairman, a Sunday school pianist, a head usher, a man. Those are all positions in the New Testament. And we voted between 2 or 3 people, so 1 or 2 went home as what? Losers. That's crazy. And why would you elect a flower chairman anyway? Or a hospitality chairman? We're already using motels, but that's how it started. But anyway, those were easy changes. The hard change was going to a small board of elder-type people who gave oversight to the church from a council of 28. So the co-manager helps see that, and he's willing to stand up front with me. He's probably a man. I mean, I know he is. And I'm supposed to say today, they would stand up there with me. He would stand up there with me, and we were on the same team. And sometimes to find the right building chairman was a chore, or who wants to work at changing a constitution? The next step is people in the know. This, too, is often skipped by churches. These are people that when you come to ordain this as a church or vote on the building program or say yes to the Constitution, they really know. And when we came to the vote, you have to vote on a Constitution. You have to vote on a building program. So that's why I'm using those. Other changes we'll talk about. But when you do that, these people have all come or had the chance to come to workshops. How many workshops? More than you can guess. At the last workshop for the constitutional change, which was a sacred paper in Akron, if you knew Carl Burnham, the founder of the church, because he wrote it, obviously. The senior pastor shall serve unhindered and unhampered by any person living or dead. So we're going to change that. So at the last workshop, honest, I'll tell you when I'm exaggerating, 1 person came. I can see him now. He came in. He said, well, I guess I'll just go have coffee, and then it was like before church evening. Now I said, let's have the workshop. So 3 or 4 of us did a workshop for one person. Point is, there were so many others. They all had a chance. When we came to the vote, these 20 people who helped form this are standing up front with me. It's not Knute Larson's change in Constitution or the manager or the chairman of this committee. It's 20 people who helped form this thing. Another 20, 30% of the people who are out there ready to vote, they know everything we're saying. And some of them are even shaking their heads. This would be true in the call of an associate pastor. This would be true in a building program. The building committee always stood up there with me along with the board. So anybody, even in a large church, could look up there and see somebody they knew and thought, this is not just one person's idea. So that's the group. The third circle is owners and shapers who help develop it, 10 to even more percent in a small church. And then number 4 is through huddles and workshops and town meetings, they were in the know. This was people hate changes and surprises. And the 5th circle is the masses, and some of them are the ones who vote. I followed that simple step of 5 steps in all those changes. I had it in front of me. I didn't give workshops on it till after it was done, after a number of changes. Questions on any of those? Tim?
Working through the idea of a constitutional change, it might be the change of the Sunday morning format or programming. Some of them would have been your ideas, some of them you would have heard rumblings from other people. So how early do you bring in other people? Let's say it's a program change. You're thinking about getting rid of Wednesday night or something like that at your church. Would you start to ask people, individuals? Would you go straight to your elders first and say, here's a wild idea? Would you wait for other people to hear some rumblings about stuff? Like, tell me through, like, the earliest process to your changes.
I think I would, an important phrase is let it leak, and someday, here's one that seems simple. I'll address the Wednesday night thing first. I'll address another one. At the chapel, we needed to add a worship service in the morning. A year before we did it, I started saying, someday when we go to 3 services, we're going to need to do this. And I'd say it to staff. And the staff then studied it. And that was managed by others on staff. We changed Wednesday night in both places, but I never said we're going to do away with prayer meeting. I said we're going to try to start putting prayer in all the groups. At the chapel is when we started teaching PRAY and ask every group to do that at the start of the... Because I think we pretend when we say every group prays. It's often the same 2 people, or it's a quick prayer in Jesus' name, amen. So I remember deliberately trying that, and when we moved from Wednesday at the chapel, we started some other electives and things we wanted to teach and membership class, but we kept a prayer meeting, and I always went. I said always. I went 2/3 of the time, and I stayed 5 minutes because I was teaching an elective, or 10 minutes. But I would go, and I just think the lead pastor must take how much he thinks his presence means and multiply it by 10. It means something. I was telling the class this. It means something when you walk down the nursery hall and thank the teachers 10 minutes before church starts. No babies are there yet, or 2. I never think, why do I need to do that? It means something, by the way, when you look at your wife and say, what a good cook you are, if she's the cook. If she's not the cook, you should not do that. Some of you have hired cooks and bring them in. How many have a cook that you've hired that does all your cooking? Just 2 of you. In the rich churches, nobody does. No, it.
So with the Sunday morning, you're going to have a service. You start leaving with your staff. Have you talked that over with anybody else, or do you just get a feeling this is what we need to do? Once where you test the idea and look for feedback, or you already committed in your mind, we're going to do this eventually, but first I'm going to ease that idea out, and then I'm going to start to develop that idea with a few other people, your co-manager. I'm looking even for that first step.
Got it. Well, that one is a little easy to answer because you got to go to an extra service if you're 80% full. So I would start saying to the board, someday next year we need to go to another service because we're 80% full at both those services. And on staff, they're already in on this. One mistake once, I didn't include the children's pastor in every meeting. He said, he was so mad at me. He said, we're the ones that do all the work in 3 services. And you didn't include me, and I apologize, and he had to catch up. But include the people that should be there. But that one's easy. It's not easy to do, but it's easy because you have to do it. There's no one in the room who could argue with the 70-80% rule. If you're that full now, it looks full to a visitor. And people will stop inviting. When I was young, I said to our church growth consultant we had in, his name was Carl George, I said, I think we can stay at 2 for another year or 2. And he said, well, you're welcome to be the first one to break the rule, but everybody else would say, if you're 70 to 80% full in your parking lot and your pews, you won't grow anymore. So we did it earlier than that. When it's a constitution and other things, you go through those steps more deliberately because they're not sitting at home thinking, we ought to change the Constitution. Worship style is mostly a staff thing, and that we always did very slowly. No voting, no workshops. Just gradually change some things. My experience was by the time we had 4 services, one was lights and smoke and rock and roll. That was the one at 5:30. And 8 o'clock was the same choir and the same hymns, and gradually got a little more contemporary. So we had the luxury of doing one of each kind. When the 3rd Sunday, the smoke machine got stuck and more smoke, or it's called fog, I guess, came out of that thing. I was coughing, and I had to stop the sermon and say, would someone come up and turn off the smoke machine? I'm going to die. And we all laughed, and why he didn't come sooner, I don't know. Questions on any of those 5? On some things where you can't get a co-owner, you're in trouble. But by now, when you make these changes, you've already discipled some men. You already know everyone on the board and who would be good up front with you on this. The easiest step, but most neglected, I'm sure I just did that with number 4, but number 3 is having the patience to get other people in the know on this and help form the idea. I started ABFs in 1967. Remember 1967, you guys? What were you doing in 60? Were you dating the same girl then?
No, I was a twinkle in God's eye.
A twinkle in God's eye.
Yeah, not around yet.
You were virgin born?
No. I think that's eisegesis. I think that's
That's right.
is what I said.
That was a hard change. Bill Fair, that's not his real name. Actually, it was Bill Fast, a wonderful guy, was always elected president. They had 3 classes, the young marrieds, the middle marrieds, and the older. That was the old day. You don't even know this. They used to have class president, class secretary, social chairman. That was your Sunday school class. The president would give greetings. The the teacher would give a 40-minute lecture. When my parents divorced, they left the church because the church went like this. They didn't know how to handle divorce. But I do remember in that church, Calvary Independent Church, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, there was a Sunday school class called Pairs and Spares. How would you like to go to that class? Hi, I'm a spare. Nobody wants to marry me. I think I'll come to this class. That was the name of the class from bowling, if you don't know bowling terms. Pairs and Spares. But in ours in Ashland, 3 classes, big classes, lecture from a teacher, and I realized we need to push care into those groups. We need to appoint the teacher, appoint the class leader. Bill stayed with the church, but he was angry. This is the way we've always done it. Yeah. And I'm not sure we had a co-owner there. We just did it on staff. And ABF started that way, and within a few years there were 17 of them. They all had a class leader, a teacher, a care captain, and later we added a mission captain who kept them tied to 1 or 2 missionaries. On my website, there are job descriptions for those 4. I maintain, after being with 110 churches, the number keeps growing. I think I said 108. I just met one a minute ago, so I'm at 109. No, but that if you don't assign care and have somebody in charge of it, it won't happen. You just hope they'll love each other and go to visit each other. So the job descriptions are on the website there. The whole book on ABFs is there, freely downloadable. Everybody who studies those groups, I used groups from Win Arn in those days and another book on shepherding and combined them and wrote the ABF book and still use it, except call them Sunday ABFs and home ABFs or Sunday groups and home groups. I think they ought to be the same. You go to one or the other. If you want to go to 2 and be a groupie, that's fine. But Sunday groups are for anybody who wants it on Sunday. If you have 2 worship services, you have it both hours, so you get double use of every room. And then home groups are for people who teach on Sunday or prefer home groups. There are actually young marrieds who prefer a Sunday group because they have child care. Their kids are in Sunday school. Anyway, that kind of thing. Nobody in the church, they just think, I like my Sunday school class. That one we did a little abruptly. If you go from 1 to 2 services in a country church, you need to warn them plenty ahead of time. The main argument is we won't know each other anymore. That's right. And if you're over 100, you already don't know everybody. One person can know about 90 people. You never argue with anybody who says we won't know each other anymore. You'll miss them, won't you? Just listen. Questions on those 5 steps? Any others? Or something you went through and how you might do it in that area, in these 5 steps? You're welcome to say boring. It is boring. But it's better than killing yourself by saying, guess what we're going to do, and surprise them with a change and they shoot you down. Or it doesn't work. Co-manager. It's probably going to be a man because you're a man. If it's the women's ministry, it's somebody else, but you meet carefully with somebody else, 3 of you together. But those things you don't vote on, you just do. But if it's something the church has to adapt to and change, you have a strong person standing with you. You also meet with Pete Kessler and Paul Wills because they are tribal chiefs in this church. And even though the church is now running in the thousands, they have an influence. And one of them should be up front with you, and 2 or 3 of them, because they know they've been chairman of the board before. Just don't skip those things, that's all. You young people won't know this if you're under 35 or 40, but There were days, I heard a story the other day about Ronald Reagan and how he worked with the Speaker of the House. Sam Rayburn was there forever, and he worked with the presidents. And they were from different parties, but they worked together. Now it's a picture of some churches, the way the chairman of the board is. One of the guys said he had a chairman of the board who last Sunday came up to the pulpit and took his sermon and ripped it in half in front of the church during the closing hymn. Was that you, Jack? No, I was just kidding. That's what Nancy Pelosi did. Any of you see that? We already asked. I mean, talk about nerve. And again, I used to date her in high school, and she was that way then. Again, Trump didn't shake hands with her when he came in, so she's getting even. And she didn't. What was funny is she's on the camera. My wife and I were watching it together by text. And one of the texts was something about Nancy. She said, Nancy should go home. She doesn't like this. She would frown at things. She turned to Mike Pence 2 times and said, not true, if you read her lips. And Mike Pence just kept looking straight ahead. It was, it's so sad for both parties. Lance, thanks for asking me a question.
So I'm looking at it, just thinking, man, this takes a lot of time. You know, you hear stories where the church down the road just had a successful building project, and you go, wow, I wish we could do that, and you know, let's make it happen. Or the change in the Constitution, these examples you're using. You know, usually, sometimes, some people, the first time they hear an idea, they don't like it, and so part of the process is just having conversations to help people warm up to the idea. What has been your experience in bringing people along, and how I'm not asking for a time frame, but it takes people a while to get where you want them to be, right? And you're going through steps where you talk to a few people, you talk to a few more, the group gets larger and larger, and all of that takes time. I don't know that that's a question other than just throwing out what's in
you're
your
right.
head and saying, has that been your experience?
Yes. You got to be patient. Some things you can do quicker. The ABFs, they missed it, but they saw that it worked the new way. It wasn't so hard then. Constitutional changes, building programs, you got to be willing to give the time and patience. How do you change a person's mind? How do you change your wife's mind? Or we have women in the room now. How do you change a boy's mind? Are you married? How would you someday change your husband's minds someday? I didn't mean to embarrass you because you're the only woman in the room, but I want to talk to you about women in the church. We got problems, man. Sam.
My wife says she tells someone else and they tell me, and that's how I hear it.
Right. The main way you win people over is listen to them. And don't argue. And the first time somebody argues with you about something, you should just listen. Take notes. I was taught that. When somebody comes in and has a complaint, just let them listen, let them talk. Don't argue. I took notes if they came to my office. When I went to the chapel, I knew there were probably 200 people who were mad at me, and they didn't know why. Probably 10 of them knew why. And that's 200 out of it was already 4,000. And the only time I got angry was when Les Smith, he could be your uncle, he'd probably be your great-grandfather, came in to see me. He was the only one who came to me. I just would hear this grumbling. And the main reason was they were mad that Dave Burnham left. Dave was a wonderful preacher and man, and he left at age 48 after 22 years. So they took it out on me, including his mother, the widow of the founder. The only time I got angry, I think this is funny, it's not much of a teaching thing. Les, tell me what upsets you. Les said, I'll tell you what upsets me. He's in my office. He said, I understand we had just bought 4 houses and tore them down to make a big parking lot behind the church in Akron there. He said, I understand the reason there's not shrubbery in there is we're out of money and you're not telling anybody. He heard that from somebody. I said, well, then, no, that's not true, Les. The fact is, the people who grow shrubbery said we should wait till spring to plant it. Honest, that was the answer. I knew that. Oh, he said, I'll tell you something else. This was the only time I got angry. I expressed it. He said, my wife's a librarian, a volunteer, in our church library, which is a sacred place, thousands of volumes. The roof leaked in that library and destroyed about 400 books, the leaks from the rain. I said, Les, you know who built that roof? Dave Burnham. Why didn't he make it so it wouldn't leak? That's what makes me mad. He didn't know what to say. Dave was his hero. Dave's a wonderful guy. But that's the only time I got angry, and I remember thinking that, and then I laughed and said, oh, I mean, that's how illogical some people can be. There's a chapter in a book that Christianity Today wrote with 3 pastors. One of them was I, and it's called The Grieved 23, or 26, I forget which. I found out that 26 or 23 men were meeting secretly to pray for me, led by the head usher and the assistant head usher. They weren't praying for me. They were mostly griping about what they didn't like about my style. And I found it out, and I called the head usher, and I said, I heard your meeting. Yeah, I want to come to one of your meetings. No, he said, you can't do it. No, I want to hear. So anyway, he talked to them and said, okay, we'll meet with you, but we want all the trustee elders there. And I said, no, this is between you and me. And then I said, okay, I'll invite them. And some of them came. At the meeting, I took 2 associate pastors. There's a good lesson in this, so don't think I'm senile. I'll tell you when I'm senile. That's what I told my wife the other day. She said, I think it started. At this meeting, I said to the 2 good friends who were associate pastors, we don't say a word. I mean, you say a word, but we don't argue with anybody. You listen. If you ask anything, you say more. So Larry and others, that's his real name, had a list of grievances against me. From, I'm not evangelistic enough when I preach. I don't give a good, clear invitation. Dave Burnham was a terrific speaker and evangelist. Always sang Just As I Am to close the service. I listened. And then they got to, and here's another one. And the guy stood up. He was out at our camp. We owned a camp. And they were playing, it was either Shake, Rattle, and Roll, or there's another one with something about rattling or rolling, or Twist and Shout. Twist and Shout, same idea. You know Twist and Shout? It's a wonderful song. We used to sing it every Sunday to start church. He was out at camp mowing the lawn as a volunteer worker at a camp, beautiful camp, and he heard him playing, it was camp week in June, Twist and Shout. Every time I hear the song, I have a button on my radio, the 50s, songs from the 50s. When I hear Twist and Shout, I start crying. And he said, well, that's not who we are as a church. We don't play that kind of music. I was going to say sexy, and he said some word that made it bad. At our camp. One of the two associates who came with me had youth under him and camp under him, and he stood up and gave the most logical presentation of why you should judge music by its lyrics and not by that you don't like the sound of the. And he started to give this logic, and in my heart I'm thinking, oh, let's call him Kevin. Sit down. We said we're not going to argue. And he was giving a very logical presentation, and at the top of his lungs, one of the main ushers stood up. I can see him now. I can see his veins bulging right here, and he yells the following: "No rock music!" That loud or louder. Kevin sat down. I quietly said something about to get off that subject and to say we're going to differ in music, but let me tell you about that camp. It was a young life experiment. The first 3 days were secular. The last 3 were spiritual and Christian, and a commitment to time to make a commitment. Why am I saying all that? Well, I wanted to tell you a war story, but I also wanted to say people need to be heard. And if you start arguing with them, they get mad. The second time you meet with them, you might want to say why you had the music, or the second time you meet with them, you might want to get into why you're going to change the style of music. But the first time you just say, well, tell me why you think that's wrong to do as a church. And you listen. You all know this. If you're married, when there's a disagreement, the best thing you can do first is hear your wife out. Not argue with her, not say, yeah, we should buy this for this reason. I need a Corvette. And listen and take your time and be willing to stall a little bit. By the way, of those 23, there were 23, now that I think about it, because 21, I said it wrong. I think I told the class this the other day. 21 stayed in the church, 2 left. And of the 21, a number of them would come up to me and talk about swallowing your pride. They'd say to me, now you're really preaching, because they thought they had changed me. I don't think I changed anything. I might have done better on the commitment to Christ part, because Dave was so good at it. But to me, that's not the main purpose of every sermon. Not every sermon. Anyway, they thought they changed me, and I wanted to say every time, you're taking credit. You just didn't listen to me before, because you didn't like me until I listened to you. I didn't say that. I said it to my wife.
Was there a resolve between the yeller and the youth pastor? Or you just let it go?
Say it up again?
Was there a resolve between the yeller and the youth pastor?
No.
Just let it go?
He left the church, the youth pastor. And one of the reasons was he was a good friend. That's a sad chapter in my life. He was angry at me. He didn't like the idea that I said we're not going to argue with him. He didn't think I knew what I was doing. And he was embarrassed in front of all those men, and he lost presence with them. He had a great ministry with youth and with parents of youth.
Tolerated or not tolerated?
Did I tolerate it?
Yeah.
I did at that meeting. But that man that yelled it, I can still see him, and he stayed in the church, and he sat in the second row every Sunday that I preached in the first service. He was in charge of security. And because I listened, he was fine with me the rest of the time. I think you got to listen. That's off the subject, but it's not. When you're making changes, don't just hustle through it. somebody, now I ask you to think about a change you tried to make, either a success story or not, but any examples that you have? What you did that went well or went bad, and maybe we can learn from it. Please, Keith.
Yeah, we, after having a Christian school for years and it being a large one, when I showed up, it was on life support. It was already dying.
And can you stand while you talk? That'll carry it the whole way there. And I'm
Sure.
hard of hearing, so.
Oh, okay. So it's a Christian school that I've been in the town for years, and it was pretty good size, 350 or something like that, through high schools, fully accredited, I believe. But I got there, it was on life support, and that was part of the issue with the church, and I don't want to get all that. But anyway, so the big deal is how do you close a school that's dead? How do you have a funeral? Because there are about 150, 200 people involved that were in the church with this, and of course we love the idea of Christian school, but if it's doesn't have, it was obviously didn't have the support of the church. So there's the background. We patiently kind of worked with the school for a couple of years and let the school see that as we were working with them, when I say we, I'm talking about myself and some other leadership, because we were new, listening, learning, and letting them see we're in real trouble. And I also used those couple of years to interact with the leadership that was there, that took the opposite view, and just build relationships, listen to them, find out what's going on. It became apparent that unless the church stepped in at the tune of about $100,000 to $200,000 a year, the school would never make it. So, but still, there's people that so do it kind of a thing. So we got together. I called a prayer meeting, or excuse me, a meeting, and just to listen for like 5 minutes. Told them some facts. Told them we're not voting. We're not talking about it. This is a situation. We're going to pray about this for 1 month, and then we're going to come back around the second meeting, and we're going to let you talk. And everybody, so that's what we did. So it was 1 month. There was some interaction and all that, but then a month later we prayed and together, and they were able to express their themselves. Of course, you know who's going to do the talking. It's going to be mostly the Christian school supporters, with a few brave souls that would dare to speak against the school that actually did do it. And that was over. Actually, things in spirit actually got better. I said, well, let's do this. Why don't we pray for this whole situation and ask God to direct us? It's clear that this is a situation that we're not in unity about. So we did. So we had a third, but it was just a prayer meeting. All it was. That's when the change took place. Because then the school people started praying for the other people, not to change their mind, just that they would be unified. And the church people who wanted to shut down the school started praying for the school. And now they're praying for one another, and they're not shooting each other. And after that meeting, both sides, with me standing back watching, said, why don't we give it 6 weeks? We'll talk, we'll pray. If we don't see this happen, they had specific things, like financial support was the big one, then it's a done deal. And everybody agreed to that. That was the best prayer meeting I've ever been to in all my ministry. That's amazing. So what happened was we finally had consensus over 4 months of slowly working over this. And when it was apparent that it wasn't going to work, there were a lot of tears. But the cool thing, there was tears on both sides. People that didn't like it either were crying with their brothers and sisters. The school closed, and we only lost about 40 or 50 people versus, 300 or 400 or whatever.
Right. Good story. Good steps. Obviously the council of elders or deacons was with you on it.
Yeah, they wanted me, when I first got there, Solo, the new guy, and I said, no, this was my 3rd school closure, so I had a little experience with that. I said, I made too many mistakes in the first two. I really messed up bad. So with the list of what not to do, I did the opposite. And it seemed to work much better. Taking time, letting people talk, getting them to talk to each other, pray for one another. And once we got to where they're actually liking each other and praying for one another, then the decision was pretty easy.
Good. Listening is a big part, and something like that has to be a bigger group because they got kids in the school and help to own it. Anybody else think of a change that you have ahead? Maybe we can add how the steps work out. Which of the steps seems dumb or hardest? Some people don't like the co-manager, but I think it's healthy to have somebody that's really strong in that area. I know the third thing of people that help shaped it is very important. And I think many churches skip that step. The workshops, I think a great way of communication, even in the day of Facebook and Twitter and all the other ones, is to still have town meetings where you have 5 families together. I encourage every pastor I coach, if they go to a new church, to have town meetings in homes. 2 things: it makes the people that live in an area get to know each other when they didn't even know they went to the same church, but it also gets you to meet with 5 or 6 families or 10 at once. When I went to the chapel, I did 2 every Monday and Tuesday, so that's 4 a week for about 4 months. And if I met, I'm doing the math right now, but at least 10 families in each of those, that's 20, that's 40 a week for 10 weeks, is 400 families that have now I've listened to. What do you like about the church? What do you hope for the church in the future? And I just listen. Listening is a huge issue. Every night, or at least 3-5 times a week, I ought to say to my wife, tell me what you're thinking about the kids this way, or how was your day if I was away at work? What was the highlight of your day? Is the old question we would ask each other. Listening, and for leaders or for pastors, it's not always really good. Pastors are great at telling stories or having a that's nothing. When somebody says something, it makes you think of something you know, and you say, that's nothing, and tell your story. That's not why they told you the story. I heard 2 guys do that on the death of an aunt. One of them said his aunt had died in a car crash, and the other guy didn't say, that's nothing, but he says, I had a cousin that died in a similar way, and he told his story. The other guy didn't want to hear a story. He wanted somebody to listen to him and ask him questions. How do you feel about it? Anyway. Yes, Lonnie.
Go into a little bit more detail about that town meeting with the families. That's interesting.
About which?
The town meeting with your families. Did you, by yourself, or were you with key leaders, or how did you set that up? And explain a little bit more about your town meetings.
Oh, first of all, town meetings. Tell more about the town meetings. Get somebody to organize it. Don't do any of the administration yourself. Say, I'd like you to get in touch with somebody and give them the addresses of everybody that lives within 5 miles of their homes and invite them for a dessert. And tell them I would like to come around. I always took somebody with me from the church, a man. And I had 5, that was when I went to the chapel, and every time we had a building program. And so I would communicate in the building program, but when I went there, I would ask questions about the church, what they liked, where they see a need, what people group they think we're not reaching. Frankly, I'll add this. The first one met from 6:30 to 8. People like to know how long it's going to last. I would get there at 6:30 and leave at 7:30. I'll never forget it. I think we did it 4 times. The second one that evening met from, I think I'm right on this, 6:30 from 7, and they had dessert first. So I missed dessert at both places. But I went to that meeting then and got there after dessert, and by the 8:30 or 9, we were done. And I was home having just met with 20 families. Yeah, I would do it in a church of 200. I would do it in a church of, then the church was almost 4,000. Many people didn't come, but I sure touched a lot. And if they feel like, if you've listened, they feel like they're on your team. Or you're on theirs. I don't know which. Okay, that's, yes, Matthew. Is this about marriage?
No, we'll get there. Those town meetings, did you have that was posted in the house of the family that you were trying to meet with, or did you have another family volunteer to host that?
I think, I don't know. I was trying to meet with 10 families. So somebody hosted it, and they all brought dessert. So now they've shared with each other. Lyle Schaller's famous saying was, when people have a job or bring a casserole, it's their church. So it's killed a lot of birds with one stone. They got to know each other. Their neighbors didn't even know they went to the same church, especially out in the country where you drive past each other's house. Yeah, I like that idea. I would do it in a country church with 100, and you meet with 10 in each meeting, and yes.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you see a lot of what we're talking about here is you're making a change, adding something new, or something, using something. What if the change is just to get rid of something, to kill off a ministry? Would you have a fundamentally different approach if
Yes.
you're going to get rid of your Wednesday night kids program or your Sunday morning
Let it-
ABS? I know you wouldn't get rid of that, but if you did.
Right. I'd still let it leak, but I'd make sure that all the right people are knowing, and of course the one who's in charge of Awana, if you're going to kill that and do something else, you better communicate a lot or have somebody do it if it's not you. But yeah, we killed prayer meeting at both churches, but put prayer in all these other places. Now, prayer meeting was under me, so it wasn't like there's another leader that's going to be mad. The people that were mad then were the older people that thought that's the only time you pray together as a church. So once they saw that all the groups were praying and they could still meet, and I would jump in for 5 minutes, then they accepted it. I would say from the pulpit, we used to have a prayer meeting and we'd get maybe a couple hundred people there, but now and I gave a number of the people in groups, they're all praying in their homes or in the Sunday meetings. And that's the good of PRAY, because you can get more people to pray, but you got to make sure they pray then. Yes.
For your town meetings, do you send some questions ahead of time to that group so they kind of know a little bit of just prime to pump questions, or?
I don't
even
remember.
In this case, like you're trying to shut something down or start something new,
They were about building programs, or when I first went to both churches, I did that to get to know the people. So I wouldn't do that on shutting something down. I'd make as little of that as possible and just make sure the leaders knew, and make sure you have something better in.
hour, you don't have a directed kind of topic, you could just.
Right. Well, they knew when they were coming, bring their building question, how they're going to do this, and in all three cases where we did it, they had to raise in 3 years the amount of money. So that was, and then with building programs, you have a lot of other informational meetings, and your people that form it are the great givers of the church. You all know this, that when you come to announce to the church, we need to raise, name the number, $3 million. Okay, when you already, and by the way, Grace did this. They announced the topic, was it 38 million? Something like that. 28, I forget, one of those two. And I'm a graduate of these schools, and I thought, holy smokes, how can they raise that much? I was at the banquet. And after they said what the goal was, I think it was 35 or 37, they said, and by the way, we've already raised 21 million. Well, now I believe in it. Everybody who says, when you raise money for a building program, you need to have 40 to 50% raised ahead of time by that 1 and 2 and 3, the people who are helping form the program. Absolutely.
If you were gonna let something die or kill it, you would talk to the people in charge and then have something to replace it that was better. So you wouldn't necessarily do this process, is what you're saying? Is that what you said?
Right. Right. That's a change, but I'd still have people in the know, and I guess it depends what the issue was. We stopped prayer meeting to replace it with more prayer, so that doesn't seem like a bad thing. I stopped visitation night because it never worked in Ashland, but so few people knew about that it wasn't a problem. I mean, you'd have 5 people come.
In the new one, it's not.
I didn't hear that.
We had that in our old constitution, once it occurred.
Does it really?
Yeah, but it's not.
Good. Yeah, that's interesting.
Time for more specifics on building programs,
Sure.
starting with how do you decide when it's time?
How to decide when to do it, or how big?
Or, all of the above.
That's a tough one. Everybody says you can raise 2.5 times your annual income. So if you get $100,000 a year, you can probably raise $250,000 in a 3-year giving program. I have a list called Polly's List, which is kind of homey, but Polly managed a program we had that raised $25 million, and those 10 steps, when followed, they work. They're adapted from Dallas, Texas, where those guys, Southern Baptists, are the best at it, where they raise money. And there's about, I was going to say a number, but I have no idea if there's 20 or 30 today, but they all use the same 10 steps. And the first step has to do with the pastors and the staff and the board, and then this committee of people who I call the co-owners, and the people in the know, or the shapers and the movers of that program. So I think every church needs a building program every 5 years, whether they know it or not. But I just laugh when I say that because that's a joke. But they can be wonderful for a church, or they can be divisive if you don't follow these steps. Get real people in the know. You don't build just to build, but if you have a need and the church is growing, you need. This is going to sound funny because I haven't thought this through, but I would bet in this room there's more discretionary money than anybody would guess, and we're students and pastors that don't make huge salaries. I know that in your church there's more money than you think there is. And people go to Florida and they go on vacation and they buy a new car. Some of them, if they understand the mission, will give money to help the church grow. But it takes time. A building program, you let it leak for a year. I mean, you start forming things behind the scenes way ahead of time. You get the owners and people that are in the know. I'd follow these steps exactly there. Make me send you Polly's list. It's just 10 steps, yeah. If you remind me of an email, I'll be glad to send it. I just sent it out yesterday. I sent it to Lance. It changed his life, didn't it, so far? Anyway, everybody that raises money uses the same 10 steps, different names sometimes, and I'm exaggerating there, but if you try to do it, you raise money from the church, guaranteed failure. If you try to do it, me, a gradual group, owners, you see why we want to build and get the other people involved? I'll tell you what I do in any size church, too, about change. I did it for 25 years or something like that, and I can't get half the pastors I coach to do it. Have a business advisors meeting just twice a year. Get everybody that owns a business or owns a big farm or that runs a business to come meet with you for an hour or an hour and 20 minutes twice or 3 times a year. call them your business advisors. You don't have to vote on it. They're not going to vote on anything. You serve them coffee and tea at 5 o'clock, and you talk a little. And then for 1 hour, less than that, you present something that's coming up. Or I remember asking them, somebody raised their hand and said, "Why are we here?" I said, "I want to hear your advice on how this church can be better givers. What can I do from up front?" And I have somebody sitting in the row there that's taking notes, and they give suggestions. Then the next time they meet, I said, "I think in a year we're probably going to have to build over there. We want to add a gymnasium. It's really been thought through. What are some ways you think we could let the people know that we're going to need their money?" And they give it. Now they know inside, let the people know they need their money, you mean us. But once they give ideas and own it, and then some of them would be put on the building committee. But I did that before we ever began to build, and those people felt like they were a part of it then. And almost every idea, forgive me for this, almost every idea they gave, we knew somehow. But I didn't say, "Oh, we already know that." No, you listen. Well, that's a good idea. One guy mentioned the triangle. You need a giver up here, and then 2 givers that give big amounts, and then more a pyramid. I've seen those. We'll do that. I didn't lie. I knew that. We were going to do that. But I don't say, "Oh, we already knew that." Don't even say that to your wife when she gives you an idea. "I knew that." Try that. No, I mean it with your wife.
When did you schedule in this kind of thinking? Because I have a sermon to prepare and people to meet with and blah, blah, blah. Did you have a specific time every week or every month that you blocked out for strategic thinking for your church? And how did that change over your course of ministry?
I used to read more management books than I should have. And I read several that said you should spend 10% of your time planning for the future. And I thought, baloney. And I never did. But I would have in there on Mondays and Tuesdays an hour in a week when I just did administration, and I'd try to think. And every August I mapped out sermons. I took off 2 or 3 or 4 weeks in August. I mapped out sermons for the rest of the year and what I would like this church to look like in 1 more year. I did that in Lake Michigan, where we live now, near the lake, on the sand dunes, and that really helped me. And then I would put steps to get to those, and then I would sell the staff on it. Yeah, I'm not wired to sit there and just daydream. It's hard for me to pray. But I would make myself do those things in my master schedule. I beg you to, back to the master schedule, to keep that, and my Monday breakfast was one-on-one with a main leader of the church, with a main leader, or with a new person in the church, depending on the Monday. It makes you do things you wouldn't do if you didn't put it in your schedule. Lance.
A couple of pages ahead, I'm just looking in your notes at just really good questions you have here. Can you describe when's a good time to get consensus, and when's a good time to stand by yourself? Like you have conviction that this is what we need to do, or this is a decision we need to make, and how does that play in with when do you suggest something, and then when do you say, no, we're doing this?
Yeah. You're talking about with your wife. Yeah, right. With my wife, I just say, okay, let's do it your way. Caution, is it on the next couple pages? Consensus versus, it's with staff, isn't it? Lessons I've learned?
Leadership lessons to learn.
Okay. Let me go through the pages and let's answer it. No, I need to move. I got 40 more minutes. Cautions and suggestions. Co-manager. Time, talk, prayer, time. Use the elected leader or the chief when he does not agree. The 10%. Plenty of time. Meet and discuss and change. 1 group, 2 and 3 groups. Help them present to others. teach them how to present it to others. People in the know. Teachers' meetings, trustee meetings. Twice a year, have a huddle of all your teachers. It's a pep rally with everybody that's an elected person in the year. It's a thank you session. It's 50 minutes long. Don't have these 2-hour meetings. Some of them maybe have at 5 o'clock. I realize that other one was mostly men and women who own their business. But that's how you get people in the know, these updates, and now with communication skills that you guys have, you can do a lot by internet and by meetings. Helps for making changes. Keep telling stories. Mission, mission, mission. That's what motivates people. The difference in ages. Young people, it's hard to get them involved. Are you going to be patient enough and have a schedule that will allow people to move along? Include tribal chiefs, letting it leak. Celebration of the changes as you go. The next is 5 circles of people. That's a little different, but you ought to have a strategy for all those people. And I like to draw it with 7 now, and the last one is the world. But remember that those are different people. You approach them different ways. The next section is alliances and compassion. There's a chart of the leaders in the church, the head, the pastors and elders and overseers, the deacons and the member ministers. You ought to know that chart. There's a good scripture there. It really has helped me through the years. I present it at every board meeting, brand new board, and tell them they're sharing in the work of the pastors and elders. I wish I had time on LEAD. I may come back to that. Lessons, example, alliances, which means relationships, and vision, dreams. How much time do you give to the future of the church? Well, at least a little bit, and think these things through. Here's where we are now. In 5 years, I'd like to be a church. Don't just use attendance or double the numbers, but use moods and those things. There's a whole bunch there on board meetings. Am I on the page now that you were asking about the prices of leadership? No. Leadership lessons to learn. Let me fill in the prices of leadership first. Learn to work hard. You got that? I mean, you have the page? Accept criticism and worse, misunderstanding. If you were the President Trump or leader of a GM plant or head of a grocery store, you'd get criticism. You have to decide that's part of the job. In a church, you're a little more careful because you care about feelings and love and unity, but you still got to have a thick skin. But we're trying to avoid some of these by information. Believe Murphy's Law. That's not in the Bible. It just means if anything can go wrong, it will. Necessary costs. Embrace the responsibility. Don't just take it. Embrace it. Plan on working hard and smart. Stir your passion. If you can't give a passionate reason why we need to build, I'm not going to give any money. See the possibilities. What will this look like? Show me some kids whose lives have already been changed if you're going to have this new outreach. And I meant to start this day by saying, before you make changes, make friends. Love the people. People, if they know you love them and you've spent time with them and you've listened to them and you've met them in the hall and you've had breakfast with some of the men, you love them. They're willing to make some changes with your help. Study the problems. Recruit the leaders. These are necessary costs of leadership. If you find you're the only leader, I would say you've got to just start developing new leaders. Unnecessary costs of making changes. Depression from overwork. You're going to work hard, but you got to still take your Sabbath and your break time. You got to do physical workout. Ulcers from worry. Discouragement from failure. You don't have to fail. Betrayal from people. That's poverty from comparison. Don't you dare say, I wish we were as big as this church in Fort Wayne. You will stand next to Billy Graham if you're faithful in the reward line. Abiding principles. Leading will always be hard work. I was captain of the school patrol when I was in 5th grade, and I didn't know how to be a captain of patrol. I was pastor of a large church in Akron, Ohio for 26 years, and I didn't know how to be a pastor of that. But you learn to do it, and it's always hard work, and it's always a work of love and time. The higher up you are in any church organization, the more excellence is demanded. Every senior pastor in the room works harder than the associate. 2 to 5 are better than 1. You ought to have an accountability group where you could say, hey, help me out. I think we need a building. That's different than all this official stuff. But you ought to have 2 or 3 good friends that you can, once a year, use a swear word and all the time be candid with each other, or where you could say if your marriage is hurting and they would ask you questions. A lot of pastors don't have close friends. I didn't have any in the church in Ashland, but I had them with other pastors, 2 of them. I had good friends in the church, but not. Example is absolute. True change takes longer than we think. These are meant to talk about a little. Smaller groups, you listen. Larger groups, you lead. If you're always talking and always have a story in a group of 3, guaranteed they won't become your friends. Listen. God uses leaders more than committees. There aren't many committees in the Bible. Leaders can expect problems. There are not many feelings as good as the feeling of loving leadership and when you accomplish something. I hated building programs in the sense of asking people for money. And at the end of 7 of them, I'd say, I'm glad I did every one. They're hard work. It helped the church. Leadership lessons to learn. Under the 3rd one is staff. That flow chart is staff. The 2nd one is check marks, to-do lists. And the first one is your own heart. But I'm going to cover number 9 first. When to suggest and when to direct. Very hard to know the difference. When it's staff and there are others, workers, if they can do it almost as well the way they want to do it, fine, as long as it accomplishes the same purposes. But when it's staff, you have a right to say, don't do it that way. I want you, please do it this way. I think most staff expect a little bit of that. Number 10, how to put people in their best positions. I think this story would apply to volunteers too. There was a guy in our church who was a consultant for Rubbermaid, made big money. And I asked him if I could buy him breakfast and he would give me free consultation. He said, sure. So I described one problem. I had 2 problems I wanted to get his input on. And when I was done with the one, I described the job this person did. I described the woman. And he said, I can help you. I said, what's that? He said, it's all your fault. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you got her in the wrong position. You described her and then you described her job. She obviously isn't cut out for that. You're going to be frustrated all the time. That was a great bit of advice. And we actually changed her job, and she excelled at being in charge of all the hospitality for the church because she was socially minded, and it took a lot for all the dining room. We had a couple dining rooms and gym and all kinds of. Anyway, even with volunteers, give them a new job. Don't fire them. Just say, instead of serving on the board next year, could you be the parking director? That'll go over big. But seriously, give them something else to do. Maybe they're a good teacher and they're not good on a board. Okay, Lance, what was your question on 9? How do you know when to
Yeah,
get consensus, when to...
yeah, 6 and 9. I was looking at 6 and 9 together.
Well, you can never stand totally alone in a church because you need them to give and to help. You always try to get consensus. If it's a matter of clear teaching in Scripture, you stand alone, of course. We were just talking about, does everything with one of you, does everything on a board need to be unanimous? And I always say no. You get consensus there, but one guy can hold up, one person on a board, a man or a woman on an official board can hold up the whole church because they have an opinion. And the answer always is, you wouldn't let somebody give one positive suggestion and therefore you got to do it. Like if somebody in your church said, is it okay if we have a square dance every Sunday between Sunday school and church? You'd say, no, that's my opinion, but you let the same guy sit on the board. I still know churches that have to be unanimous, and he can say, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to change whatever it may be. And I think that's a wrong practice to say you have to be unanimous. Yeah, I think it's a tough thing because I know my way is right and you know your way is right. So how do you help staff with, or volunteers more likely, or a board with consensus? I think it depends on how important it is, and that's something you have to decide. If it's going to hold back the church, you got to say, guys, we got to do this. And then if you don't have enough chips with those men to do it, you got to wait a year then, I guess. Other questions on making changes or these notes? Some of this is, if you're not going through it right now, you probably should be going through some changes. Some of it is boring because it applies to major changes. Let me talk a minute about number 5, how to get best wisdom for decisions. Experience, Scripture, counselors, and gut. And then you, of course, pray about it. And I just led a retreat on listening to God with 20 very strong men. I said 20 because we always have the same 20 men, but actually there were only 12 there this year. And we had all different views on listening to God. I understand, and I know there's things in my life that the Holy Spirit, provokes me, and I don't mean that negatively, prompts me to do something. I do not believe it when somebody comes to me and says, God told me to tell you this. I say, well, just tell me, and I'll have to decide whether to do it or not. But most of the time, God makes us ask for wisdom and then make a choice. And we should have counselors and read people and pray for wisdom and ask somebody who's been through that valley before. Probably many times you go with your gut, which may mean your conscience or the Holy Spirit or just your feelings. Ask your wife. But somewhere you have to decide. I personally think I listen to God by obeying Scripture and nature. And by that I don't mean something funny. I mean Psalm 19, that the same God who made all this, the heavens shout the glory of God. The voice goes through all the earth. It's a wonderful psalm. I need to hear that, and therefore I can trust Him. If He can do all that, if He can make a baby, He's amazing. And then He speaks through Scripture, so you take everything you know in Scripture. He speaks through Jesus, and there He shows us how it's fleshed out. And mostly he says to us, I'll give you wisdom. If any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God. And it doesn't say he'll give him the answer. He'll give him wisdom to make a good decision. And you know that's how you raise children. I don't like it. I think I told a couple of you this. In 5 search committees that I've helped in the last 2 years, 2 of them said, we know God knows who the man is, and our job is to find out who that man is. And I said, why do you have a search committee then? Why are you watching videos? And I knew what they meant. But God uses us to decide. When you decide to get married, you don't just pray alone. I know Jim Mora did this in his book, God Told Me. But most of us ask God for wisdom, and then we date and we figure it out. And Janine and I, down there near the Billy Sunday Tabernacle, amen, decided we wanted to get married, but it was after 3 years of hard work. And my promising her a certain amount of money. No, but I led a retreat up at Maranatha recently with seniors, and they asked me to speak a whole session on how God speaks to us, and I did. And I said, I think a good picture would be in getting married. God didn't tell you who to marry, but you pray, you think, you read Scripture, you talk, and then you decide. And I said, how many of you, and there were probably 100 there, how many of you had God tell you who to marry? And I was hoping nobody would raise their hand. 2 people did from our church, the chapel in Akron, in the front row. Ken, and I forget her first name. I said, well, you ruin my illustration, but most of us have to work at it. And I don't know what to say. Did God tell them that's what they felt? Can he do that? Of course he can. Does he tell us what to preach on? No. And if you tell me, I don't even think you should say to the church when you go to build, God wants us to do this. Or God told us to do this. You may say God wants it. How can they argue with that? The building committee and the board and all of us in leadership feel we should do this. We need your help. When you say, God told us to do this, people do that all the time. It's like I'm off on a hobby horse. Anything else on change? Yes.
I believe about it, but I'm the worship pastor at our church. And
that's dangerous, by the way.
Yeah, it's probably the most political job of the church, I would think. I was not the pastor that steered our church away from hymns and into a blended worship service. I was hired after that decision was made. And I was hired with the direction from the elder board. We want to be a blended service and we want to do some hymns and some praise choruses. But there is still a memory of people who've been in the church for a long time when we used to all be organ and piano and hymn. And I'm hearing a lot of voices from the congregation that wants to go back to that. But then that is not the way that the elders have decided is the way forward. And we're trying to reach a younger generation. So anyway, we have one service, so the option of splitting and doing a contemporary and a traditional is not an option. I'm just curious if the change has been made, and I wasn't part of the change, but I'm here now, and you're hearing rumblings and repercussions of a change that you didn't make. How do you help to bring peace and unity and wholeness when you weren't the change maker?
Well, you got to follow leadership, so you don't have a choice. The senior pastor wanted that too.
Yeah.
Is he a good guy?
Yeah.
He's here with you today. I think you listen to those people, but you don't agree with them, and you just say, you really miss that, don't you? But you keep going the way you're going.
Yeah, so we just talked at our last board meeting about how much we let their voice, for lack of a better word, matter, right? We feel like this is the direction that God has called the church to go, but it is still not, I think, a popular direction with a large segment of our congregation. So it is right, and I agree that it's right, but I'm just looking, do you have steps on bringing peace afterwards if there's not unity and harmony about a decision that has already been made?
No. I think you just listen to them, you don't agree with them, you just say you missed that, don't you? And you make sure you do good hymns, and you remind them why you're doing this. You are getting some new people and some younger people.
You were hired for your specific
Well, he's
task, and you
Well,
listen to say,
Well,
Say,
but I'm the one that they stop in the hallway, right? Because I'm the one on stage with the microphone.
Yeah.
So
but can you continually say, in a kind way, I hear you, but talk to them?
I don't know. That's what I'm looking for. Is what do we do to help bring peace and unity afterwards?
This book here.
keep doing it well, and sing really good songs for both sides, and never talk about it from up front. Now we're going to do something that some of you won't like. I think just time heals that. I wouldn't let those people run your church because they haven't thought it through. Gordon MacDonald wrote a great book, Who Stole My Church? Have you ever read that? Is that the book?
Yeah.
I think the way you count up there is part of it there. It's 3 steps forward, 1 step back. You missed 4 up there. Sometimes we make a big decision, and on that topic, we do have to take a little step back and say, when we talk to people and say, this is a decision we've made. We can't go backwards in the sense of decision.
I agree.
But we need to listen and not we made a mistake.
Right. No, it wasn't a
We'll
mistake.
apologize.
It wasn't a mistake, but I'm just looking for ways to bring more unity. And
Yeah, I think just patience and time and loving spirit, which you guys both seem to have. I would just say, there's nothing to argue. Don't you understand about youth? They don't understand that. I don't understand how people like certain things that 20-year-olds do. But I love them, so I'm going to give them space because they're my grandchildren, our grandchildren. But I think it'll get better over time. Just do really good songs that both of them like while you are. Blend in, the joke is, this more than I do, that you make everybody mad. And it's hard, but we did it for years, and it can work very well. I would do timing of service and make sure you have other things in the service that help all ages, like prayer that's done well, the pastor and his wife praying together, and other things, variety, so that it isn't so obvious you've just switched from traditional to new.
over a long stretch of time. I'm not saying it was done poorly.
Right.
It's just there's still people who feel wounded or slighted or angry.
Right.
So
They'll catch up, or they'll die. During one of the jazzy songs, during one of the rock and roll songs.
Colossians in the study of Colossians 1:15, just in the commentary of something I was reading, said when we talk about improving worship and making worship better, we tend to just talk about worship. And Paul's solution for better worship is to talk about Christ and just always lift Him up, make it about that, and else solve a lot of our problems.
Indeed. And I would make sure, while we apply it to new songs, there are a lot of, I know you know this, and you probably do it 10 times better than I could. I don't even know the songs. What would they call a Getty song?
it's a contemporary song, but it's a hymn. So yeah.
Right, but I mean, would those same older people not like that kind of thing?
No, I don't know. I think there's diversity in the answer to that.
I mean, I would watch your mix, and I think that's a good point. If I know what you're saying talk about Christ, I don't like worship leaders that talk a lot, so don't tell me if you do. I think on the screen, by the way, to show a verse on what that new song is based on, while instead of them watching you. Last week I sat in a church and watched, what do you call the thing you move up and down on the guitar? What is it? Yeah, I don't come to church to watch him move that up and down or watch the drummer waiting till he says go. Why not put a verse on the screen that introduces this modern song? And by golly, I didn't know that related to a verse. Many of those people will stand and start crying and say, now I accept this new music because I saw a verse. I've seen that happen never. No, but honest, that's a serious suggestion. Do you do that?
We do introduce songs with verses, but not necessarily to say this song. Not in that way. Good idea.
In Christ Alone, of course, you're saying that's a medium song, and it's a beautiful song. You could put a verse about Christ alone, and you could do that for one of those modern songs more. Just don't do any of the songs that those people think you should dance or that doesn't say anything.
Right, no, yeah.
You don't.
I'm very critical about lyric. So, yeah.
And don't defend them like the guy did, because he'll say no rock music.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to wind down. There's a thing there, priorities of a pastor. I'd be glad to answer questions on those. Who you are as a person. Pulpit comes third. Circles of influence. Think about those. Those are those 7. And decide what you do for all those people. Thank you for being a part. Any final questions? Yes, sir. Is this about marriage again?
No, not yet.
We've had fun.
It's been nice. Priorities of being a pastor. So most of these make sense. But would you explain hobbies a little bit?
Do something in the church that's your hobby. Mine was writing. I was an editor down here on the island for 7 years. So I do public relations writing and other things that are written, and I would call that my hobby. It's not in my job description. I didn't want to ever assign that to someone else. If you like cars, or bikes, maybe you need to start a bike club in the church. That's all I mean. I started a running club. I did. Matthew, you better. God told me that you should start a running club.
I'll test that against Scripture and we'll see what we come up with.
Thank you. I knew when I took this assignment, it's a boring assignment in some ways, but I want to tell you it's where a lot of churches wreck. Or pastors more than churches, I suppose. Well, churches, both. So think about it. If I can ever help by email, I'm glad to. It's what I do. And